Her husband flew his mistress to Los Angeles to have his baby. He called the housekeeper and said, "Keep it quiet. My wife can't find out until after the birth." The housekeeper replied, "Your wife already found out. She sold the $180 million estate, froze your offshore accounts, and she's waiting for you in court." Before we go into details, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're listening from. Now, let's get into the story. The champagne had gone warm 2 hours ago. Vivian Wortman sat alone at Nobu Malibu, her midnight blue Valentino gown catching the last rays of sunset through floor-to-ceiling windows. The maître d' had stopped pretending to check on reservations, his eyes carrying that particular mixture of pity and professional discretion reserved for women dining alone on what was clearly supposed to be a celebration. The candle had melted into a pool of expensive wax. 10 years. 10 years ago today, Larry Wortman had slipped a flawless 10-carat diamond onto her finger at the Bel Air Hotel, surrounded by 300 of California's elite. Both of them were radiant, because Larry had just closed his first billion-dollar merger, the one Vivian had engineered using her family's legal connections and her Harvard law brilliance, and they were drunk on success and what she'd believed was love. Their first anniversary lived in her memory with brutal clarity. Larry's penthouse in Century City had barely contained his ambition back then. He'd cleared his entire home office, moved the Eames chairs to create space, and attempted cock AUVIN. He'd burned the reduction, overcooked the chicken, but he'd hired a string quartet for their balcony and slow danced with her to Ella Fitzgerald as downtown Los Angeles glittered below them. His hands, soft from boardroom deals but trembling with genuine emotion, were tender when he whispered, "Every year we build something bigger, Viv. I promise you, every single year, we become more powerful together." They'd made love on Egyptian cotton sheets afterward, laughing when his phone wouldn't stop buzzing with congratulations from investors. Young, ambitious, deliriously united. Mrs. Wortman. The sommelier's voice carried that particular gentleness reserved for women, being stood up. Vivian checked her phone again. Nothing new. She forced a smile that had graced a dozen charity galas. Just a few more minutes. 3 hours and 22 minutes she'd sat there. Around her, power couples shared oysters and negotiated their futures in whispers. Larry's text from 5:30 p.m. still glowed on her screen, running behind. "Babe. Client emergency. Be there soon. Where the sapphires?" Her phone buzzed. "Larry. Vivian. I'm so sorry." His voice was breathless, strained. Medical equipment beeped in the background, not boardroom noise, not the sounds of business. Her stomach dropped. "Where are you?" Cedars Sinai. Emergency with the Singapore investor. Heart episode. "I have to stay with him tonight or the entire deal collapses. I feel terrible about dinner, but next weekend we'll fly to Paris. Anywhere you want. The Plaza Athénée. I swear." A woman's voice cut through his words. Young, southern, intimate. "Larry, the doctor needs to speak with you. About the baby's heart rate." Silence stretched between them like a chasm opening in real time. "Who is that?" "Just Chloe, my new executive assistant. She's coordinating the medical team for Mr. Chen. Completely professional, babe." "The baby's heart rate." "You misheard. The investor's heart rate. They are paging me. I have to go. Have a good night, Larry." She ended the call before he could respond. Her hand was steady as she placed the phone down, muscle memory from a decade of depositions and hostile witnesses. The sommelier appeared instantly. "Just the check. And box everything, please." She drove through Malibu's dark canyons in complete silence. Their glass and steel mansion was dark when she arrived, except for the motion sensor lights that made the infinity pool glow like a wound. 18,000 square feet of architectural awards and carefully constructed lies. Larry had kissed her deeply that morning before his early meeting, said he couldn't wait for their anniversary dinner, that he'd planned something that would change everything. He wasn't wrong. Vivian walked through rooms that had been photographed for Architectural Digest, past the bar suite Larry had bought her for their 5th anniversary, past the dining table where they'd hosted senators and tech titans, past the West Wing she'd had renovated for the nursery that never held a child. In Larry's private office, the one room she'd agreed never to enter, a boundary she'd respected like a fool, she opened his safe. The combination was still their wedding date. He hadn't even bothered to change it. Inside, a sonogram photo dated 3 days ago. Baby boy Wortman Vance, 38 weeks. Cedars-Sinai Platinum Birthing Suite. Chloe Vance. I am 24 years old. Due any day now. In Los Angeles, Vivian sat in Larry's $12,000 Herman Miller chair and stared at the image of her husband's son, the heir he'd been denied by her body, the future he'd been building while she underwent her fourth failed IVF cycle 6 months ago, while he held her hand and promised they'd keep trying. She didn't cry. The tears had calmed somewhere around year 7, when his mother suggested at Thanksgiving that perhaps Larry needed other options to continue the family legacy. Instead, Vivian did what she'd been trained to do at Harvard Law, what she'd done before she'd made the catastrophic mistake of believing that love meant erasing yourself. She picked up her phone and made 3 calls. The first was to Margaret Chen, senior partner at Chen & Associates, the firm where Vivian had been the rising star before she'd walked away to manage Larry's foundation and image. The second was to Bernard Hayes, the forensic accountant who specialized in high-net-worth divorces. The third was to Mrs. Gable, their housekeeper of 10 years, who answered on the first ring with 2 words, I know. By sunrise, Vivian Wortman, soon to be Vivian Vance Norwood again, had begun the systematic dismantling of her husband's empire. And Larry was still in Los Angeles, holding another woman's hand, completely unaware that his wife had just declared war. The Cartier box arrived at 9 a.m., delivered by a white-glove courier who probably earned more per hour than most people made in a day. Vivian opened it in the breakfast room, alone except for Mrs. Gable refilling her coffee with hands that trembled slightly. Inside, nested in champagne silk, a diamond necklace that could fund a small hospital. The Wortman Legacy Collection. She recognized it from the auction catalog. Larry had been bidding against a Saudi prince for months. The card was in his handwriting, the same confident script that had signed their prenup a decade ago. 10 years of brilliance. You deserve to shine. L. She fastened the diamonds around her neck. They were cold, flawless, exactly the kind of apology Larry had learned to make, expensive, impersonal, calculated to photograph well for Instagram. The stones caught the morning light streaming through their ocean view windows, refracting into tiny rainbows across the Italian marble. Mrs. Gable turned away, busying herself with the espresso machine. He called this morning, the housekeeper said quietly. Before the courier. Wanted to make sure you'd be home to receive it. From Los Angeles. From Cedars-Sinai. The maternity floor. Mrs. Gable's voice cracked. I heard the announcement system in the background. Dr. Morrison, to labor and delivery. I've had 3 children, Mrs. Wortman. I know those sounds. Vivian touched the diamonds at her throat. 60 carats of guilt. How long have you known? 6 months. I found a hospital bracelet in his gym bag. Chloe Vance. Prenatal visit. I almost told you then. Mrs. Gable finally met her eyes. I should have told you then. You were protecting your job. I was being a coward. The older woman's face crumpled. You've been nothing but kind to me and my family. You paid for my daughter's college. And I watched him do this to you. Vivian stood, the diamonds heavy around her neck like a noose made of light. She walked to Larry's office, Mrs. Gable trailing behind with a coffee pot clutched like a weapon. The safe opened with their wedding date, 8 digits that used to mean forever. Inside, beneath his passport and stock certificates, she found it. The sonogram photo was dated Tuesday, 3 days ago, while she'd been in San Francisco at a foundation gala, smiling for photographers in D.O., playing the perfect billionaire's wife. The image showed a fully formed baby boy, fist near his mouth, measurements indicating full term. Baby boy Wortman Vance, 38 weeks. Cedars-Sinai Platinum Birthing Suite. Estimated delivery, October 18th to 22nd. Today was October 20th. Their anniversary. Mrs. Gable set down the coffee pot with shaking hands. There's more. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket, scrolled through screenshots with the grim efficiency of someone who'd been documenting evidence. He called me last Tuesday, late, around 11, asked if I'd be willing to work additional hours starting this week. Vivian looked up from a sonogram, her face a mask of composure that had taken a decade to perfect. Additional hours for what? For the baby. Mrs. Gable's voice was flat, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing this confession in mirrors. He's purchased the Henley property. You know, the modernist estate 3 houses down? The one with the private beach access. Vivian knew it. They'd walked past it 100 times during evening strolls, back when Larry still pretended to enjoy her company. 8 bedrooms, complete privacy, close enough to their home that Larry could walk there in 5 minutes. He wants me to staff it. A nursery suite on the 2nd floor, full-time nanny quarters, the works. Mrs. Gable scrolled to another screenshot, a text message from Larry. He said you'd be traveling a lot in November for the Foundation's European fundraiser tour. That's when he planned to move them in. Chloe and the baby. He told me, Mrs. Gable's voice cracked. He told me the story I was supposed to tell you. That he'd met a woman at a conference who died in childbirth. No family, tragic situation. That he couldn't bear to see the child go into the system, so he'd arranged an emergency private adoption. The lie was so elaborate it was almost impressive. Vivian could see how it would have played out. Larry the compassionate billionaire, saving an orphaned infant. She would have been expected to embrace it, to mother another woman's child while that woman lived 3 houses away in luxury Larry had provided. He said you'd fall in love with the baby once you saw him. Mrs. Gable's hands twisted the fabric of her apron. That you'd been wanting a child so desperately you wouldn't ask too many questions. That it would fix everything between you two. Fix everything, Vivian repeated softly. I told him I wouldn't do it. Mrs. Gable met her eyes with something like defiance. I told him last night. That's why he called this morning, checking if you'd received the diamonds. He knew I might tell you. He was trying to buy himself insurance. Vivian looked down at the sonogram photo again, at the baby who would have been delivered to her as a solution, a prop in Larry's theater of redemption. The diamonds felt like ice against her throat. The elevator to Chen and Associates still moved with the same smooth efficiency Vivian remembered, carrying her up 43 floors above Century City. She'd left this building 7 years ago in a fog of IVF hormones and Larry's whispered promises that she could always come back after they'd started their family. She'd never come back. Margaret Chen was waiting in her corner office, silver hair cut sharp as a verdict, reading glasses perched on paperwork that probably billowed with zeros. She stood when Vivian entered, and for a moment neither woman spoke. The Cartier looks stunning, Margaret said finally. But you didn't come here to show off anniversary gifts. I came to see if you still have my files. The Wortman Merger Archives, 2015 through 2017. Margaret's expression shifted from professional warmth to something harder, more knowing. She pressed her intercom. Sarah, bring the Wortman boxes. All 12 of them. They arrived on a cart 20 minutes later, banker's boxes labeled in Vivian's own handwriting. Margaret dismissed her assistant and locked the door. I kept everything, Margaret said quietly. Every brief you wrote, every framework you developed, every loophole you found that made Larry Wortman a billionaire instead of just another hedge fund manager with good hair. Vivian opened the first box. Inside, her legal analysis of the Singapore telecommunications merger, the one that had catapulted Larry from millionaire to billionaire. 300 pages of regulatory navigation, international tax structures, and contractual innovations. All bearing her digital signature, her Harvard-trained brilliance. The Singapore deal wasn't his, Margaret said, pulling out another file. Neither was the Brazilian infrastructure portfolio, or the European pharmaceutical consolidation. You want to know what Larry contributed to those deals? His name, his networking, his ability to play golf with men who thought a woman attorney was there to take notes. Vivian flipped through page after page of her own work. Complex legal architectures that had generated hundreds of millions in profit. Structures so innovative that 3 other firms had tried to hire her away before she'd left to become Mrs. Larry Wortman, philanthropist and professional wife. You built his empire, Margaret continued, pulling out a leather portfolio. And then you handed him the keys and walked away. Do you know what he did 6 months after you left? Tell me. He copyrighted your frameworks, filed them under Wortman Capital Strategies, LLC. Your legal innovations, your intellectual property, He's been licensing them to other firms for the past 5 years. I estimate he's made $40 million off your work since you stopped practicing. The number hung in the air like smoke. Margaret opened the portfolio. Inside, licensing agreements, consulting contracts, all bearing Larry's signature and company seal. All built on legal frameworks Vivian had developed during late nights at this firm, fueled by ambition and the naive belief that marriage meant partnership. I can prove it all, Margaret said. Every word, every innovation, every dollar. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Vivian looked at her former partner, at the woman who'd warned her not to leave, who'd said that Larry Wortman collected beautiful things but didn't know how to value them. I want to take back everything he stole. Bernard Hayes spread the bank statements across the conference table like tarot cards predicting disaster. Your husband is sloppy, the forensic accountant said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Arrogant men usually are. They stop being careful once they think they've won. Vivian sat perfectly still, the way she'd learned during depositions. Bernard had spent 72 hours combing through every account Larry controlled, every shell corporation, every thread of financial movement that might unravel her husband's carefully constructed lies. The offshore accounts are what you'd expect. Standard wealth, the man having an affair portfolio. Apartment lease in Marina del Rey under an LLC. Monthly transfers to a Chloe Vance. Credit cards, car payments, the usual mistress maintenance. Show me something unusual. Bernard pulled out a highlighted statement and slid it across the table. The Wortman Foundation for Reproductive Health and Infertility Support. The charity Vivian had launched 5 years ago after her second miscarriage, the one that had been profiled in Vanity Fair as a beacon of hope for women struggling with fertility challenges. She'd raised $18 million. She'd sat on panels. She'd held the hands of women crying in clinic waiting rooms. The account showed regular transfers. Large ones. Cedars-Sinai Platinum Obstetrics, Bernard read aloud. $240,000 over the past 9 months. Private birthing suite reservation, $50,000. Prenatal genetic testing, $32,000. A doula, a birthing photographer, a private lactation consultant. He looked up. He paid for his mistress's pregnancy using the charity you created to help infertile women. The air left Vivian's lungs. There's more. Bernard pulled out another statement. Dr. Rachel Morrison. She's been receiving consulting fees from your foundation for the past year. $15,000 a month. I called the foundation director. She's never heard of any Dr. Morrison on staff. Who is she? Chloe's obstetrician. Top maternal fetal medicine specialist in Los Angeles. Larry's been funneling foundation money to pay her directly, off the books, listed as research consulting. Bernard's voice carried an edge of disgust. Your donors thought they were funding IVF grants for low-income women. Instead, they bought his mistress a luxury pregnancy experience. Vivian thought of the gala last month, where she'd stood on stage and thanked donors for their generosity. Where Larry had kissed her cheek for the cameras and promised the foundation would change countless lives. He hadn't been lying, just not the lives anyone imagined. The foundation is in your name, Bernard continued. You're the primary signatory. If this becomes public, if the IRS audits, if donors sue, you're liable. He's set you up to take the fall for his fraud. Vivian looked at the statements, at her own signature on foundation documents, at the architecture of betrayal Larry had constructed using her reputation, her pain, her most vulnerable moments. Can you trace every dollar? Every single one. Good. She stood, smoothing her Armani suit. I want documentation that would satisfy a federal prosecutor. Because when I'm done, Larry Wortman won't just lose his wife. He'll lose everything. The courthouse in downtown Los Angeles smelled like institutional coffee and broken promises. Vivian sat in courtroom 3B with Margaret Chen beside her, waiting for the judge to process her petition. Around them, other people were ending marriages, filing restraining orders, fighting over children who deserved better. The machinery of dissolution ground forward with bureaucratic efficiency. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Keene. The proceedings took 7 minutes. Vivian presented her petition for name restoration, not a name change, her attorney had been careful to note, but a reclamation of her identity. Vivian Vance Norwood. The name she'd carried through Harvard, through the bar exam, through the years when she'd believed her own ambition was enough. Any objection to this petition? Judge Keene looked over her reading glasses. None, Your Honor, Margaret said. Ms. Vance Norwood is simply reclaiming her family name. There are no minor children involved, no intent to defraud creditors. The judge signed. Just like that, Vivian Wortman ceased to exist in the eyes of California law. They walked out into October's sunshine that felt like vindication. Phase 1 complete, Margaret said, sliding the certified documents into her briefcase. Now comes the interesting part. The interesting part began at Sotheby's 2 hours later. Vivian sat across from Edmund Price, the senior specialist in contemporary art, in a private viewing room where billionaires came to liquidate their assets discreetly. On the wall behind him hung a Rothko that probably cost more than most people's houses. The Basquiat, Vivian said without preamble. The one purchased in 2020 for $12 million. I want it sold immediately. Edmund's eyebrows rose fractionally. Mrs. what? Ms. Vance Norwood. She slid the ownership documents across the table. The painting was a gift to me, titled in my name alone, along with the Hockney, the two Bankses, and the Kusama installation. All purchased as anniversary or birthday gifts over the past decade. All legally mine. Edmund examined the paperwork with the careful attention of someone who'd seen enough messy divorces to know when to ask questions and when to simply execute instructions. The current market for Basquiat is exceptionally strong, he said finally. We could likely achieve 18 to 22 million at auction, but it would take months to. I don't have months. Private sale. This week. I'll accept 16 million from a qualified buyer. That's leaving money on the table. I'm not interested in maximizing profit. I'm interested in moving assets before my husband realizes they are gone. Vivian pulled out a typed list. I want appraisals on everything by tomorrow morning, and I want buyers lined up by Friday. Edmund glanced at the list. His expression shifted from professional courtesy to something approaching awe. This is $43 million in art. Possibly more. 47 million, Vivian corrected. I had it appraised last year for insurance purposes. All of it titled in my name, all of it legally mine to sell. Larry liked buying me beautiful things. He just never imagined I'd turn them into liquid assets. She stood, extending her hand. I'll expect your call tomorrow, Mr. Price. And Edmund? Discretion is worth a substantial bonus. The Cedars-Sinai Platinum Birthing Suite looked more like a Four Seasons hotel room than a hospital. Vivian walked past the concierge desk, because of course there was a concierge desk, and took the private elevator to the 7th floor. Mrs. Gable had provided the room number. Suite 714. The irony wasn't lost on Vivian that Larry had chosen Valentine's Day backwards. She wore Tom Ford. Black, severe, perfectly tailored. The uniform of women who'd stopped apologizing. The suite door was ajar. Inside, she could hear Larry's voice, that smooth baritone he used when he was managing situations. Just breathe, sweetheart. You're doing amazing. The baby's heartbeat is perfect. Vivian pushed the door open. The room fell silent like someone had cut the audio. Larry stood beside an adjustable bed where a young blonde woman, pretty in that California way, all sun-kissed highlights and Jewish skin, was hooked up to fetal monitors. A doula in expensive athleisure froze mid-massage. A photographer with a Canon actually lowered her camera. Vivian. Larry's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, guilt, calculation, then landing on damage control. What are you? This isn't. Suite 714. Vivian's voice was conversational, almost pleasant. The platinum package. I saw the invoice. $240,000, charged to our infertility foundation. The foundation I built for women like me, while you were building this. She gestured around the room with its dimmed lighting, its birthing tub, its carefully curated ambience of wealthy reproduction. Chloe made a small sound, her hand moving protectively to her swollen belly. She was younger than Vivian had imagined. 24, maybe 25. Wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. You need to leave, Larry said, moving between Vivian and the bed. Chloe's in labor. This is neither the time nor the place. For what? The truth. Vivian pulled an envelope from her Hermes bag. Notice of intent to file for divorce. Accompanied by forensic accounting of every dollar you've stolen, every tax law you've violated, every instance of fraud you've committed using my name and my reputation. She placed it on the bedside table, next to a vase of peonies that Larry had probably ordered from the same florist he used for her. My attorney will be in touch. Don't bother coming home. The locks have been changed. Your belongings will be delivered to your new address. I assume you'll be staying at the Henley property? The one you purchased for your second family. Larry's jaw tightened. You're being hysterical. If you'd just let me explain. I don't need your explanations. I need you to sign the papers. For the first time, Vivian looked directly at Chloe. The young woman's eyes were wide, mascara smudged, one hand still clutching Larry's. She looked terrified, which was exactly how Vivian had looked during her first miscarriage, when Larry had been too busy to leave a board meeting. How long have you been together? Vivian asked, not unkindly. 14 months, Chloe whispered. He told you he was leaving me, didn't he? That I was cold, distant, that we hadn't been happy in years. That he was only staying out of obligation. Chloe's silence was answer enough. Vivian stepped closer, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. He told me the same things about his first wife. Did he mention her? Jessica. They divorced 8 years before I met him. He said she'd been unreasonable, demanding, that she'd tried to trap him with a pregnancy. She watched the information land, watched Chloe's face shift. You're 24. Beautiful. Giving him the son I couldn't. Right now, you think you've won. Vivian's smile was sad, knowing. In 10 years, there'll be another 24-year-old. And he'll say the same things about you that he's saying about me right now. Get out, Larry said, his voice shaking with rage. Get out before I call security. Call them. Vivian picked up her bag. I'm sure they'd love to hear about the charity fraud. The IRS certainly will. She walked to the door, then paused. Congratulations on your son, Chloe. I hope he inherits your spine instead of his father's character. The elevator doors closed on Larry's fury and Chloe's tears, and Vivian allowed herself one moment, just one, to let her hands shake before she pressed the button for the lobby. The text came from Larry's brother at 11 p.m., 3 hours after Vivian had left Cedars-Sinai. We need to talk. Coffee tomorrow? Please, Viv. Let me explain. Vivian stared at the message from Derek Wortman, the man who'd been at their wedding party, who'd called her the sister I never had, who'd spent every Thanksgiving for a decade at their table eating turkey and pretending to be family. She called him instead. Vivian, thank God. How long have you known? Silence on the other end, broken only by the sound of Derek breathing and what might have been his wife's voice in the background asking who was calling so late. How long, Derek? Since the beginning. His voice was barely a whisper. Since he met her. Vivian, I tried to talk him out of it. I told him he was making a mistake. You tried to talk him out of it. Vivian's laugh was cold, surgical. How noble. And then what? You helped him hide it anyway. He's my brother. I was your family too. She was standing in the bedroom she'd shared with Larry, looking at the side of the bed he'd slept in for 10 years, the nightstand where he kept the photo of them in Positano, back when his lies were still small enough to swallow. You stood up at our wedding. You toasted our marriage. You looked me in the eye every Christmas and pretended everything was fine. It wasn't my secret to tell. You introduced them. The realization hit her with the clarity of something she'd always known but refused to see. Last year, the foundation gala. You brought Chloe as your colleague from the marketing firm. You sat her at our table. Derek's silence was confirmation. Vivian remembered the night with brutal clarity now. The girl in the silver dress who'd laughed at all of Larry's jokes, who'd been so impressed by his philanthropy, his vision, his charisma. Vivian had thought she was young and starstruck. She'd been kind to her, introduced her to donors, never imagining her husband's brother had served her up like an appetizer. The Henley property, Vivian continued, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. You handled the purchase. I saw the LLC documents. Your signature was on the transfer paperwork. Larry asked me to help with a real estate investment. Stop lying. The words came out sharp enough to cut. You knew exactly what that house was for. You helped him buy a home for his mistress 3 doors down from his wife. You set up the shell company so I wouldn't see his name on the deed. Vivian, please. If you'd just let me explain in person. Was Rebecca in on it too? Derek's wife. Vivian's supposed friend who'd held her hand through miscarriages, who'd cried with her over baby clothes they'd never use, who'd said 1,000 times that Larry was lucky to have such a devoted wife. Rebecca didn't know. I swear she didn't know. But she knows now. Vivian could hear it in the background sounds, a woman crying, voices arguing. You told her tonight, after Larry called you panicking about me showing up at the hospital. He's terrified, Viv. He knows he screwed up. If you'd just tell your brother I'll see him in court. Tell him my attorneys have documented every fraudulent transaction, every misappropriated dollar, every lie he told using my foundation. Tell him I'm not the woman he married anymore. Vivian, he's still your husband. No. Her voice was ice. Is a stranger who wore my husband's face for 10 years while he built a second life behind my back. And you helped him do it. She hung up and blocked his number. Then she opened her contacts and started making deletions. Derek, Rebecca, Larry's mother who'd suggested he needed other options for heirs. His college roommate who'd hosted the business trips to Los Angeles that were really custody visits. The couples who'd known, who'd seen Larry with Chloe at restaurants in Marina del Rey and said nothing. Margaret had been right. Divorce wasn't just about leaving a spouse. It was about excavating your entire life to find out who'd been complicit in your destruction. Vivian's phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. This is Chloe. I'm sorry. You were right about everything. He's already talking about postnatal nannies and how I need to get my body back before he introduces me to his business partners. The baby isn't even born yet. Vivian stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed, get a good lawyer. Not one of his friends. And document everything. He'll come for custody the moment you stop being useful. She hit send and turned off her phone. Some lessons, you had to learn by living through them. The conference room on the 47th floor of Chen & Associates was all glass and steel, designed to make opponents feel exposed. Larry sat across from Vivian, flanked by 3 attorneys from Hastings & Bowe, the firm that represented half of California's billionaires in their messy divorces. His lead counsel was Patricia Hastings herself, a woman famous for protecting wealthy men's assets with the efficiency of a Swiss bank vault. Vivian had worn Armani again. War-required uniforms. Let's keep this civilized, Patricia began, sliding a settlement proposal across the table. Mr. Wortman is prepared to be generous. $15 million, the Malibu residence, and continued health insurance. In exchange for a clean break and an NDA regarding all personal matters. Margaret Chen didn't even look at the document. My client rejects this proposal. Larry leaned forward, his face carrying that expression of pained reasonableness he used during difficult negotiations. He looked tired, new father tired, Vivian noted with clinical detachment. The baby was 5 days old now. Vivian, please. Be rational. You know $15 million is more than fair given the prenup. The prenup you had me sign 3 days before our wedding, Vivian interrupted, her voice calm, conversational. While I was managing final details for 300 guests and finishing the legal framework for your first billion-dollar merger. The prenup your attorney prepared while I was too exhausted to have my own counsel review it properly. Patricia's expression sharpened. Are you suggesting the prenuptial agreement was signed under duress? I'm suggesting it's irrelevant. Margaret opened her laptop. Because the prenup becomes void in cases of fraud, which we're prepared to prove. But let's table that discussion. Ms. Vance Norwood has a counterproposal. She turned the laptop to face Larry's legal team. Financial documents filled the screen, page after page of account numbers, transaction histories, and cryptocurrency wallets. These are accounts my client's forensic accountant discovered, Margaret continued. Offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands. Shell corporations in Delaware. And, most interesting, crypto wallets containing approximately $8 to $7 million in Bitcoin and Ethereum. Larry's face went pale. None of these assets were disclosed in the financial statements you provided during preliminary discovery, Margaret said, which is perjury. And since many of these funds appear to have been moved during the marriage using legal structures my client developed, structures that should make her a partner in those profits, we have a strong case for fraud. Patricia was scrolling through the documents, her professional composure cracking slightly. Where did you get this information? From Mr. Wortman's personal computer, Bernard Hayes said from his seat beside Vivian. Or rather, from his cloud backup. Ms. Vance Norwood had access to all family devices as part of managing household accounts. Everything was obtained legally. Vivian watched Larry's jaw clench, watched him realize she'd been 3 steps ahead the entire time. You also failed to disclose the Henley property, Margaret continued. Purchased through an LLC that your brother manages but that you funded. Current value, approximately $42 million. And then there's the matter of the foundation fraud. She pulled up another document, a detailed accounting of every dollar Larry had siphoned from the Wortman Foundation for Reproductive Health. $630,000 in charitable funds used for personal expenses, Margaret said. Specifically, for your mistress's pregnancy and the purchase of a home for your second family. That's fraud, Mr. Wortman. The kind that interests the IRS and the California Attorney General. This is blackmail, Patricia snapped. This is leverage, Margaret corrected. And here's my client's counterproposal. 60% of all marital assets, including the undisclosed accounts. Full ownership of the foundation, with Mr. Wortman's name removed entirely. The Malibu estate and the Henley property. And Mr. Wortman agrees to cooperate fully with returning all misappropriated funds to the foundation, which Ms. Vance Norwood will restructure under independent oversight. That's absurd. The alternative, Vivian said quietly, speaking for the first time since the meeting began, is that I take this evidence to the district attorney. Charity fraud, tax evasion, perjury. You'll spend the next decade in courtrooms and possibly prison, Larry. Your son will grow up visiting his father behind glass. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. I built your empire. I created the legal structures that made you a billionaire. I sacrificed my career, my body, my dignity trying to give you the family you wanted. And while I was undergoing my 4th failed IVF cycle, you were impregnating a woman half your age and using my foundation, my pain, to pay for it. Her voice never rose above conversational, but the words landed like hammer blows. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign my settlement. You're going to return every penny you stole from the foundation. You're going to issue a public apology and resign from the board. And then you're going to disappear from my life completely. And if I refuse? Vivian smiled. It was the same smile she'd used in courtrooms a decade ago, when she'd been the rising star everyone feared across the negotiating table. Then I'll destroy you so thoroughly that Chloe will leave you before your son's 1st birthday. Because once the world knows you're a broke, disgraced criminal, she'll realize she bet on the wrong billionaire. The room fell silent except for the distant hum of downtown Los Angeles traffic 47 floors below. Larry looked at his attorneys. Patricia was reading through the crypto wallet documentation, her expression grim. I need to consult with my client, she said finally. You have 24 hours, Margaret replied. After that, we file criminal complaints and civil suits, and this gets very public very quickly. Vivian stood, collecting a bag with the same efficient grace she'd learned over a decade of charity galas and foundation dinners. Oh, and Larry. She paused at the door. The diamonds you sent for our anniversary. I sold them. The money's going to fund IVF grants for women who actually need help. Women whose husbands haven't already moved on to younger models. She walked out without looking back, Margaret beside her, leaving Larry to contemplate the wreckage of his own making. In the elevator, Margaret finally allowed herself a smile. That was surgical. I learned from the best, Vivian said. What will you do if he doesn't sign? Vivian looked at her reflection in the polished elevator doors, a woman who'd lost 10 years but found herself in the wreckage. He'll sign. Men like Larry always do, once they realize they've already lost. The doors opened to the lobby, to California sunshine, to a future that finally belonged only to her. The brass nameplate gleamed in the morning light, Vance Norwood Legal Group. Vivian stood on the sidewalk outside the Century City high-rise, coffee in hand, watching workers install the final letter. 15th floor, corner offices, floor-to-ceiling windows with views that stretched from downtown to the Pacific. She'd signed the lease 3 weeks ago, the day after Larry's attorneys had delivered his signature on the settlement agreement. Margaret Chen emerged from a black car, briefcase in hand, looking pleased with herself. "The Times article goes live in an hour," she said by way of greeting. "I got an advance copy. The headline is 'The Lawyer Who Built a Billionaire, Then Took Him Apart.' Subtle. You're about to become the most talked-about attorney in California, possibly the country." Margaret handed her a tablet. "We've had 63 consultation requests since the announcement yesterday. 63 women whose husbands are suddenly very nervous about what you might do to them." Vivian scrolled through the messages. Senators' wives, tech executive partners, women married to men who thought their money made them invincible, women who'd watched Vivian dismantle Larry Wortman's empire and realized they didn't have to accept the mistresses, the lies, the years of being treated like expensive furniture. "Half of them can't afford our rates," Margaret noted. "We'll take 30% on contingency for the ones who can't. Pro bono for cases involving foundation fraud or reproductive coercion." Vivian looked up at the building. "The Wortman Foundation settlement is funding this firm. Seems fitting to use his money to help the women he would have crushed." They rode the elevator to 15, where Vivian's new associates were already setting up offices. Young attorneys, mostly women, many of them former prosecutors or family law specialists who'd watched too many wealthy men escape consequences. Sarah Chen, Margaret's daughter and a junior partner, met them at reception. The Hastings firm called. "Patricia wants to know if you're accepting referrals." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Patricia Hastings wants to refer clients to me. Specifically, she wants to refer wives whose husbands she's currently representing." "Off the record," she said. Sarah checked her notes. "It's about damn time someone made these men actually pay for their behavior. I'm tired of protecting assholes." Margaret laughed, sharp and genuine. Patricia Hastings having a conscience. Miracles do happen. Vivian walked to her corner office. Her desk was already in place. The same desk she'd used at Chen and Associates a decade ago. The one she'd left behind when she'd made the catastrophic mistake of believing that loving Larry Wortman was more important than loving herself. On the desk, a framed article from her Harvard Law Review days, a gift from Margaret. The title read, "Piercing the Corporate Veil, Legal Strategies for Asset Recovery in High Net Worth Dissolution." She'd written it when she was 25, brilliant and hungry, before she'd known that someday she'd be using those strategies against her own husband. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number with a 310 area code. "This is Amanda Castellano. You handled my husband's merger in 2016. Is having an affair with his CFO, and I just found out he's been hiding assets in Singapore. Can you help me destroy him? Money is no object." Vivian smiled and forwarded the message to Sarah. Another text, this one from a name she recognized, Julia Morrison, married to a studio executive who'd been at their wedding. "Coffee next week. I need advice. Robert thinks I don't know about the apartment in Venice. I want to take everything." Then another, and another. The phone kept buzzing, a cascade of women who'd been waiting for someone to show them it was possible to fight back and win. Margaret appeared in the doorway, holding a bottle of champagne. "We're not even officially open yet, and we're already drowning in clients. The website crashed from traffic. I'm hiring 2 more paralegals just to handle intake." "Good." Vivian looked out the window at Los Angeles sprawling below, at the city where she'd lost herself and then, slowly, painfully, found something harder and more valuable. "We're going to need them." "The foundation gala is in 6 weeks, Margaret said, pouring champagne into paper cups because they hadn't unpacked the glassware yet. "The one you're hosting. The press is calling it your coming-out party. Let them call it whatever they want." Vivian accepted the cup. "I'm announcing the new mission statement that night. The Vance Norwood Foundation for Women's Legal Advocacy. Full funding for women pursuing divorce from high-net-worth individuals. Legal support. Forensic accounting. Expert witnesses. Everything I wish I'd had. Larry's going to lose his mind." Larry signed away his rights to the foundation. he doesn't get a vote. Vivian raised her cup to justice, even when it takes 10 years. Margaret touched her cup to Vivian's, to women who rebuild themselves into something their enemies never saw coming. They drank, and outside, the brass letters of Vance Norwood Legal Group caught the California sun, broadcasting a message to every powerful man in the city. The woman you underestimated is now the one you should fear most. 6 weeks later, Vivian stood on stage at the Beverly Hilton in a scarlet Valentino gown, addressing 300 donors who'd paid $50,000 a plate to attend the foundation gala. Larry wasn't there. The settlement had been very clear about that. But Chloe was, sitting in the back, holding a baby, looking exhausted and alone. Larry had already moved on, according to Margaret's sources. A venture capitalist from San Francisco this time. 32 years old. No children yet. Vivian caught Chloe's eye across the ballroom and nodded once, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. They'd both survived Larry Wortman. That was something. 10 years ago, Vivian said into the microphone, her voice carrying across the ballroom, I stood in a different room and promised to love, honor, and cherish a man who saw me as a beautiful asset to manage rather than a partner to value. I spent a decade trying to be the perfect wife while he built a second life in the shadows. The room was silent, riveted. But here's what he didn't understand. You can't diminish someone who remembers who they were before you met them. You can't erase a Harvard law degree. You can't steal back the brilliance that built your empire. And you can't silence a woman who's decided she's done being quiet. She smiled, and it was genuine this time, not the performance she perfected over a decade of charity circuits. So tonight, I'm announcing that this foundation will now focus on funding legal representation for women in high-net-worth divorces. We'll provide forensic accountants, expert witnesses, and the best attorneys money can buy, because leaving shouldn't require being poor. Fighting back shouldn't require being alone. The applause started slowly, then built like a wave. To every woman in this room who's ever been told she should be grateful, that she should accept less, that she should stay quiet, Vivian's voice rang clear and strong. You don't have to. There's a name for women who fight back and win. She paused, letting the moment build. We're called survivors. And we're just getting started. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. Afterward, in the quiet of her car heading back to the Malibu estate, her estate now, legally and completely, Vivian looked at her reflection in the window. Somewhere in Los Angeles, Larry was probably with his new girlfriend, telling her the same lies he'd told Vivian a decade ago, promising her forever while his eyes were already scanning for the next upgrade. But Vivian wasn't thinking about Larry anymore. She was thinking about the 60 women on her client list. The foundation that would help hundreds more. The legacy she was building had nothing to do with being someone's wife and everything to do with being herself. The woman in the window smiled back at her. She looked like someone who'd survived a war and came out knowing exactly who she was. She looked like victory. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.